Boardroom Bound, Episode 46. Is a talent shortage looming for corporate boards? With Nancy Sheppard.
So this just felt right for me. I decided that really helping women to succeed in this next step of leadership would be my way of giving back in my semi-retirement. So I started the small consulting firm, Women2Boards, to do that.
Welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Nancy Sheppard. Nancy advises executive women who aspire to be corporate board directors on how to achieve that goal. She's the founder of Women2Boards and also involved in the Athena Alliance. And she has an incredible amount of knowledge on this topic. So much energy, so much excitement, so much down-to-earth, practical application experience that you can take from today. So many immediate ideas that you can take in action and bring them forward. You will hear all of these war stories from her career that she brings forward with amazing insights. We've got so much today. I'm just going to jump us right into the show so we can hear about it. You can hear it in my voice. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite episodes that we've made thus far. Let's jump into the show. Nancy Sheppard, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you so much, Alexander, for having me. I am actually honored to be part of the incredible guest list that you have had so far. There's some real awesome information out there that you've provided.
Well, that's kind of you to say, and I know for our audience, we're going to provide more awesome information today, right? Just from our chatting beforehand, I know this is going to be incredibly useful, and I always just like to set the scene for our audience, right? So we can look at your career today and we say, oh, we understand that you're a board consultant and you work with people and help them get through there from the Women2Boards group and the Athena Alliance, but that wasn't how it started for you, right? Your board career began somewhere that you got this expertise and background. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that to start.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was the CEO of the Western Independent Bankers, which was the largest regional banking association in the United States for over 20 years. And during that time, I served on 2 private company boards for financial institution products. I created lots of educational programs and products for directors of those institutions, and I worked really with literally hundreds of bank CEOs and board members. And I guess I've probably attended more than 200 board meetings as either a CEO or a director, and that's outside of my nonprofit environment. So I was very interested in the whole concept of governance and how to help institutions that were really trying to figure out how to have their directors be educated for many years.
And then I'd be very curious from your perspective on this, because many people listening to this show want to become a board member or maybe someday have a portfolio of board roles. Maybe that's what they want to do professionally. And the way that we're talking about it here, you had been on boards, you attended lots of boards, gave them feedback, and you transitioned. Instead of going, say, a board portfolio career, you became an advisor, you became a coach, you became a mentor. What led you to decide between those different paths?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, helping the management and board directors of independent banks understand the trends and the governance issues facing them was a huge part of my role, as I said. We had an educational mission. And over the last 10 years in that position, I grew more and more aware and concerned about the lack of women, quote, in the room, at the table.
Right.
I'd look around the room and think, wow, maybe there's, 5% of the attendees here are women. So when I announced that I was, quote, retiring, or I like to say graduating from my CEO position, which was in 2014, I received a number of inquiries about serving on other boards. As I said, I'd already been on 2 small private company boards. And I wasn't interested in a number of these boards. So I started referring other women to the companies. In one case, for example, I referred 3 women, and 2 were interviewed and 1 took the board seat. And I'm a connector by personality. So this just felt right for me. I decided that really helping women to succeed in this next step of leadership would be my way of giving back in my semi-retirement. So I started the small consulting firm, Women2Boards, to do that. The movement, though, for general gender diversity really blossomed over the last 5 years. And after I was asked by 2020 Women on Boards leadership to launch the San Francisco chapter in 2015, and after running Women2Boards for 2.5 years and really having to deal with a lot of administrative issues about running a membership organization, again, I realized that I needed a better structure than my small consulting approach. So I joined up with the Athena Alliance, which is a nonprofit which has launched a white glove advisory approach for executive women to assist them, and really has a pretty deep dive into connections with a lot of different organizations. And since I've been with them since 2017, as what they call a journey coach. And I'm happy to share more about how they approach the board journey support system. And then I turned over the management of 2020 Women on Boards events here in San Francisco area to another nonprofit, How Women Lead. And I'm still active in that, and I manage their in-person corporate board readiness workshops here in the Bay Area. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how we approach doing workshops. But I just have a passion for helping other women. I grew up in an environment where there were not a lot of other women to pull you up the ladder along the way. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important for me to give back to the women that are below in terms of their career trajectory, in terms of, they're still in their, executive roles and they really want to be involved. Right. So it's a little long-winded. I'm sorry about that, but it's really something that is really important to me to be able to give back.
And I think that's a great picture and a way to explain it. But I'd love to touch on something that we almost glossed over there, which I think was essential. Whether you're male or female, you were leading this organization where you were connected with senior executives in the banking industry. And that, to me, is screaming the word network, top network. That's why when you were leaving that, people are saying, oh, I know Nancy. I like Nancy. She adds amazing value. She's got to come onto my board. And we almost glossed over that, right? Because for a lot of people, not only you got to figure out your branding and your niche and your expertise, but you've got to make those connections. Let's not take that for granted, right? You've been laying a lot of foundation work. Help people understand what that's like. How do you go about doing that? What does that feel like? How does it work?
Yeah, I think, the networking approach is incredibly important. I think a lot of your other guest speakers have said, 85% they suggest of board seats here in the United States, at least, are filled through people or people you've been introduced to. And I equate it to when I was working in the government relations environment, which I did as part of what I was doing in the banking environment. People used to ask me about Washington, D.C., and they'd say, well, do you know Congressman or Senator so-and-so? And I would say, well, yeah, I know them, but that's not the right question. The question is, do they know me? Yeah. Because when they know you, they have a better understanding of what you bring to the table and whether they can trust you. And whatever kind of a relationship you're involved with, building trust is one of the most important things. So, I put my clients at Athena and through Women2Boards through a whole process of building allies for your board seat, tips for an action plan. And, you design and execute an action plan. The ball is in your court. Will you network actively or passively? Active to me means not only do you have a plan to connect with the people you want to meet, but you have a discussion plan for each encounter. You're going to target and segment your contacts so that you really understand the board influencers that you have in your network and how you can approach them. Are they your A contacts or your B contacts or your C contacts, however you want to designate them. But, reaching out to people like your A's, they're your close connections who know your skills and experience well, they're going to be the most likely candidates to help you to know you're qualified. And I have a whole list, of kinds of contacts that you really need to be thinking about, but it really does take a plan, and important is to record keep your contact networking. Mm-hmm. Like a diet, I said, it's like, a long-term plan. If you don't track what you're doing, your chances of success are less. Who did you meet with? When did you reach out to them? Who did they introduce you to? Who can they introduce you to? Did you thank them for the introductions? Mm-hmm. What can you do for them? I believe it was Betsy Atkins who was one of your speakers who Betsy is involved with the Athena Alliance, and she's a mentor for other upcoming women in the boardroom. And she was very clear that, relationships are about helping other people. Ask first what you can do for them, not what they can do for you. Sort of like John Kennedy
Exactly.
said.
You can hear the echoes in it. And Nancy, you and I were joking before the episode started that we're both, I'm going to call us like Uber type planners, right? So for me, this sounds normal. This sounds logical. It's basically a CRM system is what we're talking about. And for some people that might be, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge amount of work. It doesn't necessarily have to be, right? So we're talking about, you could basically be keeping a massive Excel file or a Google Sheets file of, here's all the people you talked to, here's the last time you talked to them, here's what you need to talk to them next, here's what you talked about, here's the feedback you got, here's who they connected you to. In some ways, we're just taking your LinkedIn connections and looking it into a system that's more logical way to prioritize and follow up. Is that right?
Absolutely. And Excel, I think it's some sort of an Excel sheet is absolutely great, although different people like different systems. But you know what I have found, Alexander, is that although people say they're going to do this, when I follow up with people and really, I'm on them saying, have you done it? Oh, yeah, and you get a lot of pushback. So, making that commitment, that is huge. And that's one of the major tips I tell people is, are you sure you have the will to do this? Because if you don't have the will to do it, it's going to take you a lot longer and you're going to become frustrated. Oh, I've been reaching out to people. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I talk about it at a conference or something. And I'm like, talking to somebody at a conference isn't networking to me. That's not what I mean by building allies. You really have to target the people that you want. If you're going to go to a conference, you better have a good idea of 5 to 10 people that you can connect with, learn about them, know about them, be able to ask them questions that are going to have them think that you really understand who they are and what they're doing. Otherwise, you're really wasting a lot of time. So be purposeful in your networking.
I like that a lot. And in some ways, we've kind of gone down the track here of one of the most important parts of it. We might have jumped a few steps, right? Because the networking is essential. But of course, there's stuff you're going to have to do before that. And there's probably 3 or 4 main things. There's your board documents, like your resume that you're going to build. And when someone comes to you for the first time, Nancy, and says, I have this successful career, I'm an executive, I want to do this, how do I make things happen? How do you start coaching them through the process? What do you advise?
Well, for the vast majority of aspiring directors that I talk to, I say designing a strategic plan is the first thing you should do. I have a roadmap template that I ask them to address to start their plan. And it's probably got 10, 12 sections to it. I expand on it fairly regularly to help them narrow down how they're going to position themselves. But, they're pretty simple questions, but oftentimes they really take a while to answer. Why do you want to be on a board? What's your real purpose in doing this? I mean, do you really want to do this because it's in vogue today to be thinking about being on a corporate board? Do you really, when I have somebody put down their financial rewards, if that's one of 2 things they put down, we have a real serious conversation about, okay, you may have read in the paper that, $250,000 is what a public company board member makes, but chances are this is going to be much less of a financial reward situation for you in the short term, for sure. Maybe in the long term, especially if you're going an IPO kind of a company that's going to go public, or you think they will, that's a different story. But, what are your personal goals? Why do you want to do this? Improve my network, give back my knowledge, and then really try to walk them through an understanding of what are the skills and experiences that they bring. Where have they had their time? What kind of business models? What kind of business cycles are they really involved with? Products that are most relevant to them. And some people, they can be in any industries. You're CFO, you could be an audit committee chair for a lot of different companies. I ask them once again, do you have the time? And are you willing to conduct your action plan? If you're going to spend 60 hours a quarter as a board member and you can't find 20 to 30 hours in the next few months, are you really going to be able to spend the time?
Right.
So I do a lot of soul searching before we start this process because, they have to have the patience. And these tools help them build their board documents, which, a lot of people could just start off with that, I think. But if they haven't really tackled what they want out of this, I think it is more challenging for them in the long run.
And I'm going to make a simple analogy for that to help everybody get it if that's not really clear. So imagine you decided I'm going to go to business school and that's what's going to set my career up on the right trajectory. I'll just use Wharton where I went. I'm going to go to the best business school in the world, and you walk in the door without a clue of what you want to do. You would be like a ping pong ball the first week. Oh, I could go into PE, I could go into VC, I could go into investment bank, go into consulting. I could go save the world with the whales. You could do anything you wanted to do at that point in your life. You have got to have done some pre-work to come in at least only in the financial services industry. That's where I'll start thinking about it, but you need it more honed down than that. I think it's similar to what you're saying, is that there is so much to cover. You've got to do a lot of pre-work before you go down the process. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then so if Nancy, someone comes in and says, I've done some deep thinking about it, I've had a cold towel in my head, I've prayed about it, I know this is what the right fit with my skill set, and I'm ready for this. I'm going to go down that path. Can you give us a little more detail about what it's like? Because for some of us, we've been senior executives. We know how to execute. We know how to lead the team. That's not what you're doing when you're a board member.
No, and I think that's one of the things that is the most important to recognize is that being on a board isn't for everyone. Your personality type can be challenging if you're a AA person and you want to control everything that's happening, because you can be very frustrated in a boardroom when you give an idea about this is something we ought to do, and it doesn't happen. In the next board meeting, you come and go, well, why didn't that happen? Well, that wasn't your decision to make that, and I think it's especially true for CEOs. I know that when I was doing a lot of the educational programs, we had a lot of CEOs that were there, and kind of the universal complaint that they had about their board was they don't really they don't implement what they know a board member should do. I mean, intellectually, they understand that a board member is supposed to be an oversight person or give strategic input, etc., and give ideas about what might be options outside of what the CEO and management is thinking of. But oftentimes it's like, they're trying to basically be executive managers, and it just doesn't work for me. I really have a challenge with that. So it's important that a person going into this understands that this is a role that will change dramatically from what they've been doing. And certainly, as we look at putting board documents together, that's something that's important for them to make sure is in those documents. And we can talk about interviewing, but boy, is that one thing that they really need to try to be able to communicate, is that they understand and they have embraced the idea that they're not going to execute anymore, that they are really a sounding board and give advice. And a lot of people don't know how to do that yet.
And I think that's fair, because most of us probably got successful because we're good at doing, right? So it's a very different role as you go forward. Now, if someone is an aspiring director, we can call them a future director here, and this is what they're aiming for. In some ways, it's really hard on that resume to make yourself stand out and to show that you're ready for the next level. It's sort of that chicken egg scenario, right? How do you get a job without experience? You got experience without a job. How do you coach people to position themselves?
Well, first of all, like any other sales approach, and you are selling yourself, you are the product. We refer to it as writing these documents as you go to this is your go-to-market phase, that you really are looking at making sure you've packaged yourself in a way that you understand your audience and what matters to them. If you aren't following board issues and trends, then you need to start so you can understand what's on their minds. The more you can appreciate what is on the minds of directors at your target companies, and by that I mean size, structure, etc., the more you can tailor your bio and your board documents to the specific needs that boards like theirs are addressing. For example, a large public company is much more likely to be focused on ESG issues than a Series B company that is focused on growth. And that, embrace what you've accomplished. Many of the women I advise have a problem bragging about their successes, or have a big ego, but you have to tell your stories about what made you a great candidate for a board seat. So, and don't dismiss your true value because you're too close to recognizing it. Reflect on really kind of where you want to go, not simply where you've been. Targeting specifically how you add to board discussions and decisions help position you with stakeholders and for the opportunities that need your insights. And one of the things I always say in board documents is focus on your accomplishments, not your responsibilities. I see a lot of bios and resumes that say, my responsibility was XYZ. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. I laugh at the idea of, when you say you're responsible for something, my son had the responsibility to make his bed every day, but that didn't mean he accomplished it. Tell people what impact and successes you had, not the role of your job. I think there's other people who've said, come up with a few really great accomplishments that really stand out, even in your bio, in your one-page bio. And I'm a strong believer that you have a one-page bio that really summarizes who you are with that value proposition at the beginning of it. It highlights some of the key companies that you've worked for, and it focuses on the accomplishments that really validate what you're saying is your value proposition. Most people at this point have so much stuff that they have accomplished and things that they have done. That's a hard thing to do, oftentimes, narrowing it down. This takes quite a bit of work for most people.
I think that's incredible value. And you can imagine if you've talked someone through that and you've helped them develop the right bio and the right board document, resume version, and they're actually able to get through into the interview process. This is still going to be another massive challenge because it's a very different interview from when you're trying to get the CEO role.
Absolutely.
How would you coach through someone about that, even just understanding their expectations of what they're walking into?
That's one of the biggest questions that I often get about what can I expect in the interview process, the whole interview process, whether it's coming through a recruiter or it's coming from non-gov committee. And, the simple answer is there is no one approach in the interview process.
Right.
It can be as easy as a great meeting with a founder or a CEO that brings an offer. I still encourage you to meet with other board members, even if they offer it right away. Or it could be a year or two process meeting members of the board, the executive team. I mean, if they're really well planned, they have great succession planning for their board. Typically, these processes go on for quite some time. And I've heard people had interviews and they didn't hear anything for a year, and then all of a sudden, they got plucked and said, "Yeah, we'd like you on our board." So, a lot of it can go dead, completely dead, and you think nothing has happened, and behind the scenes, all the little hamsters are running around and they're doing all sorts of things that you don't know anything about, and oftentimes even some of the recruiters don't know anything about. One of the things I found is that many of the successful executives that I have been talking to have been on the other side of the interview table for a very long time. They haven't had a job interview. They've been promoted up through their organizations. They're the CEO. So they haven't been there on the other side. They've been in control of asking all the questions. And you do get to ask some questions. But I urge my clients, members of Athena, to prepare like you're going to do a TED Talk.
Mm-hmm.
Know the company, products, board, management, investors. I mean, spending 1 or 2 days is really not unreasonable. Investor presentations, what you can find on YouTube about people. Know yourself based upon the specifications. As best you can find out what those specifications are from a recruiter. You should have a pretty good idea. From smaller companies, sometimes I find they waffle a lot on what they think they want. Maybe the non-gov committee chair wrote it up, but not everybody agrees. So, but one of my mentors who has helped me, who's been on numerous public company boards, tells me that when she sees some specs and she's going in for an interview, when she sees there's something on there that isn't on her resume specifically, she will address it right away. She will make a point to say, I see that you're looking for someone, for example, as with cybersecurity experience in transportation. Well, I don't have cybersecurity in transportation, but I've been a CIO, and cybersecurity was under me, and we're not in transportation, but we're in an area XYZ that really has a lot of similar kinds of issues. So, don't get crossed off the list because they're doing a checklist and say, oh, Nancy didn't have that. Let's just, we're going to throw her aside.
That is great value, especially if you ever think about going for some of those sort of what they call in the UK quango, sort of quasi-government, quasi-public, where there's literally just going to be a checklist and who checked all the right boxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's two other things that I would say really are, other than there, I provide a whole list of, these are sample questions you might be asked, and these are things you need to think about. But one of the most common problems I understand from feedback I've gotten from board members who have interviewed people, some of mine included, is they overtalk.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't answer the questions in a succinct, concise approach, they want to know, what are you going to be like in the boardroom? One of the worst dysfunctions that I've seen in the boardroom, and I experienced it myself because I was the CEO, and I had 14 CEOs on my board for over 20 years. And
that's no airtime for anybody.
Oh my God. And I had one or two of them, they would opine on everything. And, I would have to coach the chairman to try to cut them off. And, everybody would just roll their eyes. And if they could have gotten rid of this person or these people, several of them, they really would have. So listen more than you talk in that interview. Really listen to the questions. Allow for some silent space to think through what you're going to say and say it concisely.
I think that makes sense. And you were talking about Betsy Atkins' episode previously, and I remember she had some great advice there. She said, basically, you want to talk, and this would be hard for some people, way less than half the time. You want the other people to do the talking because you will learn so much about the board from them, because you got to remember it's a two-way interview street. You want to make sure you're a fit as much as they're seeing if you're a fit. And if you do all the talking, you'll never be able to chance to interview them. That's
so true. So true. I think she had an analogy like it was a baseball game. It's like, you only get three times. I mean, I'm not sure whether that was the interview or that was actually in the boardroom meeting itself.
She was talking about the board meeting, how little you should talk, which I'm sure shocks most people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They wanted me for my information and my skill. Why don't they want to listen to me all the time?
And the same other dozen people around the room who've got great value to add. We all have to make space for them. We've all seen that from other meetings, right? So it's not uncommon.
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
I would love to talk with you, just sort of a random question for a moment, because you're over on the West Coast of the U.S. and you're in a space of the world where there's tons of PE and VC. And I think when most people think about a board role, we go right to large public companies. You were talking about that before, right? So I was at JP Morgan before this. We kind of picture that role and maybe the big payday and the fancy leather office overlooking Central Park, all that sort of nice stuff. But you're in a space where there are, I think, exponentially more opportunities. If you think private equity and venture capital, do you coach people that they should consider that, or maybe that's a better way to start because it builds up your board resume so it looks better for other opportunities? How do you think about that space?
Absolutely. I think that looking at companies that are private equity portfolio companies is a great opportunity for certain kinds of candidates. And I think it is definitely there is more of a specific kind of person that they are often looking for. That a PE company will have a portfolio of a number of companies, and after the founders and the private equity partners sit on it for a while, they'll decide we want to add one or two board members, and those tend to be very specialist board members. They need to be very focused. The opportunity for executives who've done things that are in the area of significant rapid growth, scaling, global expansion, acquisition, actually and the ability to mentor the founder as a CEO are a few areas that I've seen that are greatly in demand. Now, there are others that show up. They could be a particularly product-focused environment, for example. Maybe you have a background in cybersecurity or educational programs or something that they need someone who has a much broader perspective, has been involved with a company that's at least 2 or 3 times the size that they expect to get to in the next couple years. Oftentimes, those kinds of specialists, as I call them, are well connected to the partner in the private equity firm, but they tend to be reaching out a little bit more than they used to. Now, many of the private equity firms do have talent directors, and the talent directors include part of their job is to try to help source some board members. And I think we're seeing some push from some of the partners of some of these more progressive and firms that really understand that gender diversity and any kind of diversity is really important. And we're starting to see a little bit of movement in that area. But Alexander, you're absolutely right. When we look at the public companies, the number of public companies has shrunk by 50% in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And the number of private companies is, we're talking 5, 6, 7,000 private equity company firms that are out there, plus private companies in general. But there's some great opportunities for this. And if you haven't really served on in a corporate board environment, jumping into a public company environment is going to be really challenging for not only for you, but for a board that thinks, oh, wow, this person really hasn't spent a lot of time in the boardroom. It's not just that you haven't been on a board of a public company before, but it's that you haven't really, you're not there day in, day out. You don't know what is expected of public company board members.
And, it's fascinating. There's so much learning that all of us has to do. There's a massive learning curve if you are an aspiring board member. And there's so much we've covered today. And even one of the ones that's so fascinating is understanding, say, the recruitment process, your interviewing cycle. And you and I were talking before the show, and there was a book that is coming out very soon that you were involved with, which I think would be really helpful for our audience to know about. Can you describe that and tell us a bit about us?
Oh, absolutely. Be happy to. I was involved with a book that is been launched actually in August of 2019. Get on Board, Earning Your Ticket to a Corporate Board Seat. I spent several months with the author as her editor and as a contributor after she and I did several workshops together on this topic in 2017. She had done a previous version of a smaller book, and this version is a handbook for those interested in understanding how the board recruitment process goes. This is really a new area for most executives, whether men or women. This book isn't focused on women, it's focused on everyone. And for a large percentage of aspiring directors, the road can be really challenging. And as I said, it can take several years. And it's so under the radar screen that it really is challenging for a lot of people to understand some of the pretty basic stuff. So it's about a 200-page book. And, provides a lot of information on, what's a startup advisory board? What are some of the factors? What are some of the comps that you can expect? How they differ, different types of boards, and what are their expectations of board members that are on those roles? And, what's the difference between a lead director and a chair, and who should serve on the compensation committee? And, it's pretty basic in terms of the roadmap, I think. But it really is something that if you're serious about the process, read it over a weekend, use it as a resource to go back to and be able to say, hey, I'm doing those things. It has a lot of samples, which I provided a number of samples of things like the roadmap I talked about earlier. And includes a lot of samples of some bios, CVs, etc. So, there are things that you would pay a consultant typically to walk you through. So if you're willing to read, and if you're not willing to read, then don't bother to be a board member.
You got to read the lead.
You got to read those board portal and board books that can be anywhere from 200 to 1,000 pages long before your board meeting. And sometimes, if you're getting it from a private company or a small company, you get it 2 days before,
right?
Which I think is criminal, but
Well, Nancy, we have covered so much, and there's so much more detail around this that I'm imagining people would love to be in contact and learn more, and you're involved with multiple great organizations. What would be the right things that you would say people should follow, or the ways to stay in touch with you? How would you like that to happen?
Right. Well, most of my time is spent now with the Athena Alliance, and they use a combination of a digital platform and a high-touch approach for coaching, tracking. They have virtual salons, learning materials. It's a membership organization. They've had a pretty good success ratio of over 225 board seats since they launched about 3 years ago, 2017, 16, something like that, have been offered through their platform. So to me, that's one of the best approaches in terms of so for women who are really serious, senior executive women. I mean, it is definitely somebody who's ready to play the ball game really well. I also am involved with How Women Lead to do these workshops, and we have I've done 4 series this year. We have one coming up. Well, let's see. They're involved with 2020 Women on Boards. We'll be offering some in 2020. So check through their website. And then my own website, Women2Boards, so that's with a number 2, has information about me and about some of my services. I don't have a huge clientele anymore because I spend most of my time doing the Athena program and the How Women Lead and podcasts like this and presentations to organizations that really want their women to have a better understanding of what the board journey is like. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Twitter at Women2Boards, and would love to hear from people. And I'm excited that, the movement of having more openness to what I would call a modern boardroom approach, which really means you're bringing in other people other than, CEOs and CFOs. And many of those people that have that experience are women, marketing, HR, CIOs. There's a lot of women that have this incredible experience. So the modern boardroom of tomorrow will have more women just by virtue of the fact that intelligent boards and CEOs know they need that diversity of information.
And diversity of thought is essential for companies to be successful. I think it's hard to argue with that, right? That's how you get to innovation. And Nancy, yes. I appreciate you helping all of us sort of push ourselves outside the comfort zone today, to push that envelope, think about how we take ourselves forward. And we were just delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Alexandra, thank you so much for including me in your bevy of incredible speakers. I'm honored, and I encourage listeners to go through your board-bound list of episodes and really, at least a couple a week. Listen to them when you're driving around. It's a great way to get information.
And I didn't pay you to say that. That's fantastic. Thank you.
You did not. I'm in it because I've been doing it.
Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Nancy Sheppard. It was amazing the amount of experience and value she brought in this episode, from the very beginning of wanting to be a board member and what that looks and feels like, and setting expectations, through actionable steps to start you on that journey, to the very advanced stuff about being in the interview room and nailing that, getting that home run so you can go out there and land that seat. And of course, all the stuff in between, the sort of nuggets and the war stories that she shared. Clearly, she works with some great organizations like Athena Alliance, who've been very successful doing this. And if you head over to our website, podcast.gordon.edu, you will get the links to those sorts of resources that we talked about today. And related to that, please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are just so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Now, thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.